So today we're going to be talking about worms, types of worms, types of fish, you look for with certain worms, how to fish the worms, and the differences between these here worms. Worms are just fantastic. They're a part of, I believe, Americana fishing history, a part of American folklore, fishing folklore, and it's just, if you don't know worms, you don't know fishing. Right here, this is my worm rigging kit, and it's got just about everything I need to rig up my worms. I got sliding weights, I got hooks from size 2, size 1, this is my favorite size, 4, I have floats, I have split shot, and I even have smaller hooks, and depending on what I need, everything's all neat in here, and I even have barrel swivels. So everything I need for worm fishing is in my handy worm rigging kit. Now in this video, we're going to discuss the three types of worms that I've used throughout my life for fishing. But the first worm is right here, and that is a red worm, or red wiggler they might call them. The next worm we're going to talk about throughout this video is your nightcrawler. Your American, that looks like an American crawler, or your Canadian crawler, or your nightcrawler. And finally, we're going to get into my favorite of all the worms, is the European nightcrawler. So the first worm we're going to get into detail here and talk about is the red wigglers, or your red worm. So right here, these are your red wigglers, trout worms, or red worms they're called, and smallest, as you can see, of the worms I have used. Now these three types of worms are the worms I've used throughout my life. They're going to be my choice if I'm going to be fishing for trout. And because they're small, of course you're going to use them, you're going to be looking for smaller fish, such as panfish, trout. It's a more delicate worm, and I like those fish. You want fish to come in and grab them whole. Worm is going to be my number one worm for trout, and some people might call them trout worms. And you can buy these things in pet shops, bait shops, and online even. Those are your red wigglers. They're the smallest worms, and you can keep them in a cooler environment. So my choice of worm for trout is going to be the red wiggler. Bluegills will rip them up. Crappies, perch will swallow them whole, and your trout will swallow them whole. And for the red wiggler, I'm going to use an assortment of bait hooks. These are actually emerger hooks from about a size 8 to a size 12, maybe even 14. We're going to talk about rigging briefly. Now this is going to be my number one. If I am trout fishing with worms, I am going to use the red wiggler, and that's a little bit bigger hook. This is and I'm just going to put them on my hook here, and that's got to be a size 8 emerger hook. And actually this worm here you can get away with, that's a good size, but maybe a size 12. It is a little thicker hook, so it got a little weight. And what you want to do is go about 1/3 down the top of the worm, and you can see it's really wiggling now. And you're just going to, let me show you this guy. You want to thread him on, almost sandworm style, sandworm style, as such. You can see they really wiggle. That's a little bit thicker hook. You really want to thread them on a little better than that, but we're in a rush here. And that's how you're going to hook up your worm. Now if you want to get him down in a moving current, and that's where I'll use these in creeks, rivers, for trout, you can drop on a split shot about 18 inches up your line. And if you're going to fish them in still water for, say, crappie or perch, you can put a float of your choice on as well. But that's the red wiggler, and you can see they're really wiggling. You're probably wondering, what the heck is this? This is my worm farm. So I'm going to put these guys back home, somewhere in there. And this is actually loaded up, banana peels. We'll talk about this another day, but this is just my worm farm. And it's actually loaded up. I don't like to disturb my worms much, but they are in there. Go to my second favorite worm, and probably the one I've fished most with throughout my life, is the Nightcrawler Earthworm, Canadian crawler, American crawler, whatever you want to call it. It's the larger of the worms. These ones don't happen to be too big. I think these are American Nightcrawlers. The Canadians tend to be a little bigger, but they tend to run 6 inches is normal. So 4 to 6, 7 inches is normal for your Nightcrawlers. This is going to be my number one worm I'm going to use, say for largemouth bass or catfish would be a close number 2. Overall, it's my number 2 worm, but the number 1 choice if you're going to be looking for largemouth bass are Canadian crawlers. They're a bit more firm than those red wigglers. Of course, they're bigger, and they're also going to be a very good choice for panfish as well. But again, earthworm, it's going to be your number 1 worm for largemouth bass, close to number 1 worm for catfish, a very good worm for panfish, and my bottom of the list worm for trout. But for panfish, you're going to want to break them up. I'm not going to do that. So you can get a couple, cut this guy in half. The earthworms are very versatile, somewhat hardy. They don't withstand heat too well. You can use a little bit bigger hook. I'm going to be looking at maybe a size 2, 1. Actually, my favorite hook right here, even a number 4 hook, depending on the size of the worm. And you're going to rig them up the same way. Now that worm, you can, if it was a little bigger, I'd use the bigger hook. But I think he's going to match well. Here's my worm rigging kit. And he's going to match well with my size 4 hook. And you'll rig them up all the same. You want to go about 1/3 down, thread them right through, size 4 bait hook, just like such. And I will fish them weightless. Moving water, you want to get them a little deeper. You can fish them with shot. Still water, you want to suspend them, fish them with a float. You're looking for catfish, maybe smallmouth bass or walleye on the bottom. Now, I'm not going to talk about the rig too much, but this is what you need. Is you want a barrel swivel, your egg sinker, and your number 4 hook. And actually, I'm sorry, that should be set up like such. And you can get your worm right down to the bottom. Another cool thing, if you're fishing for catfish, I will thread on 1 worm, drop them down. That worm gets a little tired. I will thread on another worm, maybe 3 worms, until I got a nice big beautiful worm ball, and send that down right down to the bottom for catfish. I have here, I'm going to talk about here is your worm storage solutions, and they're all right here, all the ones I've used in the past. The first most obvious one is the container your worms come in. Just put that right in your big vest pocket, your bag or whatever. It's insulated, ready to fish. Cooler fall day, same thing with the red worms, already in their container. Another neat thing is you can, if you want to bring worms with you with your fishing lures, These here little takeout condiment containers. Make sure you have the lid. Just throw a handful of your worms right in there, put the lid on. You got worms, you got your lures, and you're ready to fish. Another one I've been using, and this is on the boat, or you're going to be on shore, somewhat stationary. I load up a ½ pound of worms right in a Tupperware container, holes on top, ice on the side, into a little pouch. Last all day. I am going to be walking around in the woods, and I'm going to be doing that soon, and I don't want to be carrying a big container. I have these here cloth bags. You load them up with your worms right inside. Here's your worms. There's your bag. Throw that pouch right in your pocket. And you're fishing. Actually great in the wintertime, keeps them warm, tight to your body. And those are ways you can carry around your worms. Now we're going to finally always get the best to last, and my favorite worm of all time, and I actually just started. Well, I used them in the past, but they were harder to get with the internet. Now you can get them online by the pounds, but I used these a lot this year, and they are just killer for panfish, catfish, your bass, moving water, still water, fast water, deep water, shallow water. It is a hardy worm. It's the European Nightcrawler. They are just great. It's my #1 worm for many reasons. They got thick skins. They're hardy. They withstand high temperatures. They withstand cooler temperatures. They're easy to keep at home. They're panfish cannot rip them off. Catfish cannot shake them off. Bass will swallow them whole. Trout love them probably more than the red wigglers because they're just bigger. You're looking for trophy trout. The European Nightcrawler is the worm to fish with. It's just a superior worm, in my opinion, because of all the characteristics they carry. It's just a versatile, good-sized worm. They get up to be, they can grow to be 7 inches, but they tend to run, as you can see, 4 to 5 inches. But the European Nightcrawler is my #1 fishing worm that I like to use. If I'm going to pick a worm for anything and all, it's going to be the European Nightcrawler. It's my #1 worm. A lot of people have fished with worms. There are many people out there that's been fishing for decades, and they've never used worms, and I find that most interesting. All right, I got my worm rigging kit, and actually all I've been using for these here European Nightcrawlers is a #4 bait holder hook, and I've been rigging them up, as I showed you, Carolina style, with a barrel swivel sent to the bottom. If you're fishing them for trout, again, you can fish them straight up with a hook, and I do that too. I'll throw them in still water with a hook, let them drop down and suspend, or add a split shot, get a slower sink rate. You want to hold them, suspend them, fish them with a float. It's the worm rigging kit. It's all in there. The #4 hook is all I use, and I rig them, just as well. For big panfish, I just rig them whole, thread them right through, about 1/3 down. Catfish, I'll ball them up. Bass, rig them just like that, whole. Beautiful worm. Panfish, they're great for, because the bluegills tend to grab the end of the worm and pull, and I don't want to stress them any more than need be, but they'll grab that worm and pull, except they won't pull it off your hook. It's just an amazing worm, the European Nightcrawler. Just my #1 fishing worm. number one choice for any fishing, versatile, it's going to be that European Nightcrawler. Treat for you here. You're probably wondering what's that. I'm going to show you these guys. I keep a worm farm, and in here are some pods. They almost look like caviar. There's one right there. I don't know if you can see it. There's a few in there. They tend to be green. There's one right there. Up there. They almost look like caviar. You see? Maybe I can separate it out. Somewhere in there. I don't want to lose it. But those are baby worms. Oh, there they are. There's one in the middle there. And there's one right there. I don't know if you can see it right there. My thumb is pointing. And there's one right there. But those are going to be big worms one day. And those are pods. I'm just fascinated by it. So my number one worm for trout, bass, panfish, which is crappie, perch, bluegill, and catfish, all those great American freshwater fish species, is going to be the European Nightcrawler. What do we get out of this video? We've learned the different types of worms, what types of fishing to do with these worms. Every worm has a place in fishing. Worms are probably the most underutilized, yet most magnificent, productive way to catch a fish. They're a part of American fishing history. The worm has probably caught every major game fish out there to this day. Probably holds tons of records that we don't even know about for trout, bass, panfish, catfish, anything out there. But the European, the Nightcrawler, Red Wiggler, all beautiful worms to use. Thanks for watching.